Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ludlow Fringe and to my talk about my experiences with cancer, which I hope isn't going to be too upsetting or boring for any of you. It's not a normal subject to have on the Fringe Festival, but I hope you enjoy. I am Simon Waterfield. I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in early 2017. I had all the tests and scans, and I had it out finally in September 2017. At the time, I was too busy fighting it really to give any thoughts about how it might be affecting me. But into 2018, and it hadn't cleared itself properly. I got put on hormone treatments, and then at the end of the year, I had 34 radiation treatments. And it wasn't until post-operation I started thinking about how it affected not just me physically, but mentally as well. And I started penning a couple of short stories just for my own amusement. And they gradually increased in number, and I decided to put them in this book, available on Amazon. There's a link in the website for the Fringe, which you should be able to get any further information you want. I'm also doing all of this to support Prostate Cancer UK. All the funds from the sale of the book and from all the Fringe festivals I've been in this year will go directly to them. There's also a Just Giving page as well. Now, that's all the introduction sorted out. Now, this isn't your usual book about cancer. I'm not an expert. I'm not even trained in anything medical or psychological. It's not my cancer diary. It's not even my cancer blog. It's not a textbook about cancer treatments. It's not a list of natural remedies for cancer. Cancer, I found, had effects other than the physical. Its ripples go much further. And I was surprised how much I was actually affected. I wanted to explore how my cancer affected my thoughts and emotions. And this is a collection of short stories and observations on those ripples. And I'm inviting you to experience some of those ripples. Now, I'm doing 4 stories, but the book covers 13 stories altogether, with some photographs of my life as well, which you might well enjoy. I hope it will give you an insight into how people affected by cancer are feeling, and that those who are, whether you actually have cancer or whether you're a friend or a relative, you can be aware that your thoughts aren't strange or unnatural, and that they can be coped with. The first story I'm going to give you is called Alone. It's a story about loneliness, about an inability to communicate. Now, a lack of communication is not restricted to cancer sufferers, but it's a relief when you can find someone to talk to. It's wonderful. Once upon a time, in a world not unlike our own, there lived 2 people, a man and a woman. They lived their own lives. They had their own stories, stories of their childhood, their school days, their youth. Their stories grew with them through adolescence and into childhood. These stories embraced love. As all storytellers know, love begets marriage, and marriage begets children. And the parents' stories entwined with those of their children. But it's here that our stories of our 2 subjects begin to differ. The woman, the first person in the story, we will call Mary for no particular reason. She loved her husband, and he loved her in turn. They had a good life. They worked, they created a life for themselves with a home and children. The children were loved, and as happens, the children grew up. And while they were growing up, they heard stories about faraway lands and new opportunities. These stories were beguiling, as good stories are, and the temptation was too strong to resist. Their children left to pursue these stories, and the trail of their stories extends many hundreds of miles from their home. Mary's story continued, intertwined with her husband for many years. One day his story ended, as they do, but Mary and her story continued quietly and alone. Her friends also had their stories cut short one by one. There were fewer people to meet and with whom to share stories. This particular morning, Mary has woken up and lies in bed listening to the background sounds of her empty house, the growl of the occasional car going past, the central heating humming, the seagulls calling in the sky. She wants to hear the letterbox rattle. She yearns for a letter or a postcard from the family instead of the usual junk mail. The ghosts of her family inhabit her imagination. She hears her children running around their bedrooms, her husband making his way downstairs, her children's voices playing in the garden. But eventually she gets up and makes her way downstairs. She has to slide down on a bum, one step at a time, because the stair lift is broken. Her lonely breakfast of porridge is made and eaten slowly. There's a line of pills in front of her to be taken with a cup of tea. The morning news programme is on Radio 4. She sometimes disagrees strongly with someone or other and gives them a strong verbal dressing down, even though there's no one to hear her. She washes up, even though it's only 2 dishes. She wants the house to be tidy. After all, anyone could call. She fails to consider that nobody's called for 10 days. She picks up the paper and reads it. She mutters at some stories. She reads the articles aloud, as if sharing and expecting comment. She does the crossword, again reading aloud the clues as if expecting help. When she's finished, she looks out into the front garden. Is the garden tidy enough for her callers or for her neighbours? She watches the cars go past. Her heart quickens as one slows down, but it always drives on. She watches people walk past on the pavement. There is an occasional face she knows. All are older people, and they're all wrapped up in their own stories and not looking her way. Turning away from the windows, somewhat disappointed, her eyes alight on a set of photographs. Her extended family, her children and grandchildren. She smiles and says hello to each of them in turn. She sits on her sofa, her usual position, and stares at the armchair her husband used to inhabit. She starts one of her conversations with him. She complains about her arthritis. She moans about how expensive the weekly shop is and how difficult it is to buy food just for one person. She tells him again about her last phone call with her son and the news of her grandchildren. And she moans about the fact that he's still not said when he's going to come up and see her again. The emotion starts some tears, but she's not going to give in to it. To channel her feelings, she starts shouting at him, blaming him for leaving her, blaming him for letting the children go. She finally runs out of things to say and descends into a quiet stupor, staring at the empty chair until, unexpectedly, the front door bell rings. So good time now to meet the man in his story. We'll call him Andrew for no particular reason. His story is still growing. He has reached the children begetting stage, and they in this story are still young. One day, his story, as everybody's stories I want to do, takes an unexpected direction. This morning he's up and starting his morning shave. He's looking into the bathroom mirror and is wondering who's looking back at him. It's a very weird thing seeing and hearing yourself declare that you have cancer. Andrew, of course, knows cancer happens, but it happens to other people, doesn't it? And he's looking at the figure in the mirror and wondering why the reflection has just told him, I have cancer. He doesn't understand. Who is this telling him and why? He shaves, trying to make sense of it. At least he doesn't cut himself. And he goes down to breakfast. His wife's already in the kitchen, busy feeding the children and organising them for school. She smiles brightly at him and tells him what he can have, provided he makes it himself. But he wants to talk to her about the experience in the mirror. It's important to him. She's too busy though. The kids need to be taken to school and she to work. So he thinks about tonight. Will they get a chance to talk then? He will be tired and, depending on the traffic, he may well be late. She will have books to mark and one or the other will fall asleep on the sofa. It's how people live their lives these days. He's worried though, not just about getting the opportunity to talk about it, but whether he can talk about it. He can think about it dispassionately for hours. But when he comes closer to talking about it to her or to any of their friends, it ends up with him welling up and he's suddenly unable to string two coherent sentences together. But he feels he must not be weak about it, especially in front of the family. So if he can't feel himself in front of the family, he shouldn't talk about it at all. Now that leaves him alone in his own head, a prisoner unable to share his feelings and his thoughts. The man in the iron mask. Meanwhile, inside his head, he and his thoughts find their own way to express themselves. Listening to music, for instance. Anything can set him off sobbing. The next moment a song may start and he's thinking how good that may sound at his funeral. He's pondered about the etiquette of planning his own funeral. It's an interesting philosophical quandary. He eats his solitary breakfast and the whole family leave at the same time. They go in different directions and in different vehicles. Now it's his third call of the day and he presses the doorbell. He knows by now to wait, and invariably a little old lady with a stick opens the door. I'm here to fix your stair lift, madam. Not too soon either, young man. He goes in with the toolbox and switches it off at the mains. He opens up the control panel and does some tests. He works out what the repair is, and it's soon fixed. He runs some tests, and he's ready to go. She offers him a cup of tea and he follows her into the kitchen. She is pleased to be able to play the hostess. She offers biscuits and cake. He wants to refuse, but he can see she needs company. He relaxes into the guise of a guest. It's something he's got used to in his job. But then the radio, so far ignored, suddenly starts playing one of those songs, and there are tears in his eyes. She notices and passes him the box of tissues with his tea without comment. She sits him at the table. He looks at her thinking, she's got nothing to do today but listen. And she looks at him, wondering if her life is going to change, at least for the rest of this afternoon. You know, young man, a story is for telling. And she passes him the plate of cakes. Now, the next story is about man's best friend and how storylines and lives can overlap, as can their endings. It's called Padme. We have a dog, a puppy, a border collie, a replacement for a dog called Sharp, another border collie who died a year ago of love and old age. We've got to look forward to a few months of accidents, chewed furniture, and general mayhem. But we also have years of companionship, walks, and cuddles to look forward to. Walks in the local parks, walks in the countryside, walks on beaches, and walks in the mountains. Walks with the family, and walks with my wife. Walks with the kids, and walks with just myself and the dog. Walks in the hot sun and the sit downs in the cool shade. Walks in the wet with all that mud to clear off afterwards. Walks in the wind which pick up her ears like angels' wings. I suppose I'd better introduce her to you. This is Padme, your usual black and white border collie from her mother, and there are little brindle touches from her father. As you can see, she's got a very engaging smile and very expressive ears and a tail. Named, of course, after the famous Star Wars queen, a lady with balls and a bad choice of husband. 15 years or so of exercise, poo bags, love and companionship to look forward to. Now, this is an amazing and wonderful thing to be thinking about. Dogs are for life, no question at all. But it got me thinking, whose life? The cancer always provides a backdrop to my life these days. It provides brackets to go around everything. It provides the front and back cover of the book of my life. That book is still being written. But a new chapter, a new story is being started. The introduction is being written. The story will be filled with our adventures, what we did and where we went together, the walks we had, the games we played, the balls thrown and chased, the squirrels chased up trees, the views seen, the people talked to, and the other dogs met. This is going to be a noble book. And what I've got to include in this story, an early chapter, is a Christmas walk in the woods above Westerham, a village in Kent, not too far from where we live. It's always been one of my favourite local countryside walks. It starts on the high street and winds past some really cute Victorian cottages. It goes on to Mill Lane and then over the Darrant River. And this is where the history starts. I'm a sucker for local history. We walk past an almost non-existent stone building built over a stream. It's hard actually working out if it is a building or just a rock outcrop. The stones are large and roughly hewn. Here, up to 100 years ago, was a watermill grinding corn for the town. The river was altered upstream as well to provide a couple of mill ponds to conserve water during dry periods. But all that's left of that whole industry is the foundation of the building and the lakes. The people and the history and the industry have disappeared. Padme doesn't care. This is an opportunity for a drink and a splash in the water. And if she's lucky, she can chase some water birds. The path continues up a steepish hill between fields. On top of the hill, there used to be a cricket ground, but it's been long since ploughed away. The trees here resemble huge opened umbrellas. The deer graze the lower growth from the branches, leaving a horizontal underside. but Padme doesn't see any deer to chase today. The path continues around the base of the ramparts of a huge Stone Age enclosure. This has merged into the landscape and the forest surrounding it till it's almost invisible. But I try and visualize what it might have looked like and what the view from the ramparts might have been like when it was in use. I imagined Padme here, working as a proper sheepdog, controlling the animals. The path wanders on into more woodland. Here and there are dips in the ground, out of which it's fun for Padme to run. And there are also mysterious low tunnel entrances, if you know where to look. And they, for Padme, have a strange smell, which excites her. But she can't get in to explore because there are big, heavy grills across the entrances. The interesting smell is, in fact, bat poo. And the tunnels are now protected SSIs for the preservation of the local bats. And these dips and tunnels were, in fact, old Georgian and Victorian stone quarries. And then, of course, there is the Folly on top of the hill, an old brick and stone tower, ruinous and covered in ivy. There are romantic connections with Henry VIII, but it was actually built 200 years too late. There's another wonderful story that it was built by the owner so he could view St. Paul's over the North Downs. Shame it was 200 feet too short. It was, in fact, built by a local landowner 250 years ago, just to entertain guests, a folly. For me, it is a romantic place to sit and dream for a while. For Padme, it's a chance to rest her paws while I explore what I can of the place. I imagine stories about what might have happened here, the parties and the dinners held inside, the horses riding past us, lovers' trysts in the nearby woods. But I'm still weak from hormone and radiotherapy, and this is as far as I can go at the moment. So it's back to Westerham for a coffee before going home. We sit on one of the cafe street tables, and Padme's still lively and over-interested in all the dogs going past. And I'm kept busy trying to stop the table going over and losing my coffee. This is the sort of walk that dogs and people are born for. History and the imagining of our predecessors' lives is a wonderful thing. But in my state of mind, I can't help reflecting it's studying the history of people who have died. We are going to make a wonderful history together. But what's going to be at the end of our story, Padme? Instead of us making one last trip to the vets, will it be you standing on that rock outcrop on the beach on Anglesey with the rest of the family? What do you think my ashes are going to smell like, Padme? Well, the next story is about another pet, this time with different problems. It's called The Hamster's Ball. Do hamsters dance? I don't know. However, they do seem to enjoy themselves in those transparent screw-together plastic balls that allow them to run around the floors of your house. The hamster can't escape, so the cats can't kill it. You look into the plastic ball, marveling at how cute the hamster is and how fast it can go and how it learns to steer itself. You think how free it is. It is, however, looking out of you and wondering why it cannot escape you, why it cannot hide, why there are no dark corners, and why it can't touch anything. It also wonders why, it being such a clean animal, that its pee splatters all over itself, even when it tries to move away from where it's peed. I have to sympathise. I find myself feeling very much the same quite a lot of the time. I have this transparent ball around me too. It's a cage I can't open. one I'm waiting for others to open for me. It contains me with my cancer. It stops us separating. I can be happily involved in another activity or thought. It may be a film or a book or a walk or a drive. And then I will remember my cancer. And immediately this invisible glass bubble surrounds me. It's like the shields going up around the USS Enterprise on Star Trek. I can see out of it. My sight's not distorted by it. I can smell out of it. Cooking, people, flowers, the dog, whatever. My nose works perfectly. Shame about the dog. I can at least reach through it, not like the hamster. I can feel the wind. I can feel my surroundings. I can touch people. I can hear through it too. The sound of children playing in the nearby primary school, which I've always found to be a very evocative sound. The sound of wind in the trees, or rain, the sound of running water, of voices, of music. What it does for me, however, is to distance myself from everyone else. No one else seems to have cancer. No one else is going to die. No one else is going to die badly as my grandfather did with the same cancer. No one else is going to go through the same difficult treatments. No one else suffers this consequential falling apart of both my family and my work life. No one else is suffering from the same grinding anxieties as I have. How's the family going? How's work going in my absence? Is the work I'm managing to do sufficient for my bosses? What's my long-term future at work? And rather more pressingly, has the cancer gone? If it has, for how long? If it's not gone, what's going to happen next? What is outside the ball is the rest of the world. All the other people, my family, my friends, my colleagues, my acquaintances. There's a barrier between us. Sometimes it's paper thin, sometimes it's a brick wall, but it's always there. People seem unsure how to talk to me, especially about how I am. As a consequence, I'm hesitant to talk about what I can say about my cancer to them. So here I am, running around in my big plastic ball, trying to be part of the world, but quite unable to escape it. Now, the next story is about a friend of mine who contracted cancer and my relationship with her. This time it's about my relationship with someone else who has cancer before I got cancer. It's called Arena. Arena, is that you? Wait for me at the bottom. And so started a closer relationship. She was on the down escalator and I was on the up escalator at Bank Tube Station one midweek day. I met her at the bottom as promised. She didn't know who had shouted. She didn't have her glasses on. But we went for a coffee and caught up on life. As I recall, she was in London to get a visa for an unlikely sounding trip to Asia or China or somewhere. We first met when I was around 24 years old. She lived opposite my bedsit in Streatham. She had a growing family, but now she had retired and downsized to a little village called Steyning. We phoned occasionally. I dropped in on her sometimes, and whilst down there on business, occasionally the family came too. We had a good chat about family and friends and her occasional work and her grandchild. It was nice. So over the coffee, she dropped into the conversation. She'd recently had a run-in with bowel cancer. The doctors assured her it had gone. The cancer wasn't important. It was gone. It was quickly forgotten in the pleasure of seeing one another and exchanging family news. And we vowed to stay in touch more, which we did. It was an odd relationship right from the start, some 37 years before. I wasn't really aware of her at all until one day when I was hauling my golf clubs out of the car, she came over and asked me about the game. I was flattered. I didn't have many friends at the time, apart from those at work, so this very well-spoken, very attractive, married 40s lady with quite an easy manner wants to talk to me. Wow. She wants to know all about the game, where I play and how easy is it to learn and so on. And I found myself offering to take her with me the next weekend. She could see what it was all about, and if there was room, she could even have a try. And to my surprise, she accepted. So next week, Magpie Hall Lane Golf Course had a treat. There was me, dressed as smartly as I could, and there was Arena, dressed for an afternoon in Chelsea, accompanied by an ever-present lapdog called Limpo. We did a round of 9 holes, and when there was space, I showed her how to swing a golf club. He seemed quite taken with it all. As for me, I was somewhat inexperienced in the ways of older married women, and I was a bit confused and bemused as to what was happening, what she was expecting. It became a regular Sunday morning outing. She got good enough to hire a couple of clubs and hit a ball around with me. And I got invitations to join them for Sunday lunch on our return. There I was introduced to husband Ken and daughters Laser and Brittany. Ken and I had something in common. He worked for my previous employers and was in property like I was. As for Laser, she was a lively public schoolgirl and as a result rather out of my experience. Bryony was a rather more demure, quiet girl. We even played some squash together. And things developed from there. Arena had some interior design clients for whom she was always looking out for things. And this led to trips to Kings Road, Chelsea on a weekend, visiting antique and design emporia, with me along to help with, I was never quite sure what. There I was, generally carrying this lapdog around with me in my arms or in a whisker basket, a couple of steps behind Arena. I was not unaware of how we might have looked. But what the hell, I enjoyed the company of both her and Limpo. And eventually it all led to a memorable weekend trip to Guernsey. I was going there on business, and she invited herself to join me to make a weekend of it and to see some relations of hers. And I was deputed to make the travel arrangements. Unfortunately, the weekend chosen was in high summer, and there was literally one hotel room left on the entire island. A twin room, as it happened. I was somewhat nonplussed when she said we should take it. I was even more mortified when we got there. The hotel had carefully pushed the single beds together to make a double bed for Mr. Waterfield and Mrs. Green. Arena, of course, saw the funny side to both the situation and my rather useful embarrassment. I can still hear her chortling to herself as the hotel staff pushed the beds apart. We did have a good weekend then. The years went by. Ken died and she moved to Battersea. We kept in touch. She became godmother to my children, and they in turn loved her. In the end, she ended up buying a pretty little cottage in Stenning, way out in Sussex. She was never quite sure what to do with her life. And then one day, her cancer returned. All of a sudden, she was in hospital in Worthing having an operation. Her bowels bypassed by a colostomy. She had had experience of chemo the last time round, and she swore she did not want it again. I continued to visit, as did the rest of the family. And we remade acquaintances with her daughters. She was bright otherwise in hospital and wanted to talk, wanted news of the kids and what we were doing in our future. And the conversations were always light-hearted. We joked about hospital life and the people in the other beds. We didn't actually talk much about the cancer and how she felt and what her future might bring. People always have trouble communicating with people in hospital, especially in potentially life-ending situations. What do you talk about? Do you have to be serious? Can you joke around the conversation? What are the social conventions in these situations? To be honest, I was a lot less uncomfortable than at other bedsides I'd visited over the years. It did make me feel uncomfortable about the bedside relationship I had with my father before he died. Admittedly, he had dementia and couldn't communicate at all. Eventually, it became obvious she wasn't going home with the amount of care she required. Her daughters found a hospice providing care and medical help. She had her own generous room, something she adored after the ward life of Worthing Hospital. I continued to visit her, and she became weaker, and she died. She was a precious friend of mine. Within 6 months of her death, I was diagnosed with cancer. I found myself in a hospital having an operation. I found myself in bed with tubes sticking out of me. I had cancer. Arena had cancer. Cancer killed Arena. Cancer killed my grandfather. I found myself a recipient of hospital visits. I became aware of the difficulties and the differences in communication, from being the one in bed to the one beside the bed. I recovered from the operation, and the following year, cancer returned, and I had hormone and radiotherapy. And I began to reflect on Arena and our relationship and our communication. Had I done the right thing by her? Did she need more support? Did she want to talk about her cancer and her future? But did the fear of embarrassing herself or upsetting me stop her? Should I have raised the subject, or was it right to be led by her conversation as I had done? Did I give her the opportunity of discussing her end in the way she wanted? How did she think of her death? What did she expect? What did she want? Did she experience the same glass wall that cancer put between me and the world? Had I managed to break into it for her, like I wanted my friends to do for me? Or was this glass wall a figment of my imagination? Had I said the right things to her? Had I got as close to her as she wanted, as I wanted people to do with me? Did I lighten her load? Is that what I want? Yes, it is. Now, with all those stories, I've probably put you in a state of depression somewhat, but the remaining stories are about love, about hope, and about enjoyment of life. The first is called, naturally, Hope. I can still recall that phone call. I was driving to a show in Norfolk. It was a Friday afternoon and had to stop the car to ring my daughter back. Hearing her excited, "I'm engaged," to Chris, of course. It was her first month in college, but the love and hope in her voice was plain to hear. It was exciting and touching. A new family, a new future was being planned. They had everything to live for, degrees to be earned, careers to be forged, children to be bred, a home to be made. As a father, it was a wonderful moment. Now, 7 years later, I am standing on a hotel balcony in Sorrento in Italy, remembering yesterday's wedding ceremony. It did take 7 years to happen, but now they're married. Their life plans are already well in place. They both have degrees and careers. They've bought and completely refurbished a flat together. They've made their own home. I will always remember the morning of the wedding. She made her first entrance to me at the hotel foyer in the dress for me as a father. The hope was plain on her face, and her whole being as I met her in the hotel lobby was alight. So beautiful, so eager. My heart overflowed, as did my eyes. I watched her. I watched them through the ceremony. Their happiness and love and hope shone through everything. It reflected my hope, our hope, my wife's and mine for their future. It also reflected on my hopes for the future. I reflected on my radical prostatectomy the previous year. I reflected on the hormone therapy I was on then. That had stopped me enjoying the wedding party because it made me feel so tired. Imagine having to leave your daughter's wedding party at 9 o'clock in the evening. I still had hopes for the wedding, for the holiday, for the radiotherapy, finally, hopefully killing the cancer, and for a long and happy future with grandchildren. The late sun is shining on the deep blue bay of Naples stretched out below us. On the other side of the bay rises Vesuvius. Your eyes can't help but be drawn to it. As the sun sinks, one can see the lines of street lamps peppering its flanks. These outline the residential areas built on its flanks. Now it struck me that this showed the ultimate in human hope flying in the face of logic, geography and volcanology. Who would want to live on the side of a live volcano? We dragged ourselves out of bed the following day and went to visit the ruins at Pompeii. I was gobsmacked at its extent, its preservation, the grandeur of it all, and to be honest, the number of tourists. But once I relaxed into the place, it wasn't difficult to imagine the people who had lived and loved there and built themselves. Over it all stood Vesuvius. You can't help trying to get good photos of the ruins with Vesuvius looming over the background. I chose an area that the tourists didn't really bother with, away from the big ticket buildings. There, it wasn't difficult to see whole streets of the original town empty of tourists. There were buildings you could go into. They were uncared for, weed grown, they were silent, but for crickets, the breeze sighing round the building corners, and the very, very low murmur of the tourists far away. I sat just inside a ruined villa in what was once its atrium, its formal hall, out of the sun and in a cooling breeze, and I let my mind wander. In my mind, the ruins slowly rebuilt themselves around me, and the whole town repopulated itself with the original Romans. The walls of my villa are plastered and beautifully painted, newly painted for this special day, and the roof protects us from the hot sun, and there are gentle sounds of water from the fountains in the garden. There are lots of people gathered today in my house, all in formal attire. I'm dressed in my smartest toga. My heart is overflowing and I'm close to tears of happiness. My daughter is being married today. The soothsayer's omens are good. The house is dressed in flowers and greenery. There are more guests arriving all the time, and servants are circulating with wine. We're waiting for the women to join us. Friends are wishing me well. Others are telling me rude jokes about the wedding night. And the husband-to-be is nervously pacing the courtyard. I wave and smile at him, showing him my support, and he blushes and steps out into the garden. And the bride appears in the atrium. She is beautiful, radiant, smiling, her eyes full of excitement and hope. Her dress, the formal tunica recta, is fastened around the waist with a band of wool tied in the traditional knot of Hercules. The flame-coloured veil is startling against the pale dress, and her blonde hair is split into 6 traditional strands, framing her shining face. Everything goes well, the ceremony and the meal, and now it's night time. The torches are shining and flickering in the breeze. It's time for the procession. All the guests gather in the atrium in front of them. My wife holds our daughter, and the groom ceremonially pulls her out of her mother's grasp. Hand in hand, smiling, they lead everyone out onto the street. There are peals of laughter, and passers-by cheer as the groom tosses nuts and fruit into the crowd. Everyone proceeds to the groom's house, singing the rude wedding songs, the torchbearers in front. On his doorstep, she says her wedding vows before he tenderly picks her up and carries her over the threshold into his house. She is his now. She is no longer in my household. I remember when we got married, I carried my wife over the threshold, thinking of the new life that was in front of us, stretching into the future. The same hopeful new futures now in front of them. And on the way back to my house, the earth shakes as the mountain explodes, a huge black cloud billowing up and out, red lava flowing down its flanks. Terror strikes unexpectedly. I open my eyes, looking at the quiet volcano hanging over the ruins. Yes, I think, it must have had a similar effect to being told, you have cancer. The next one is a story showing that in spite of everything, there is enjoyment and peace and love to be found in your life, no matter how you feel. It's called Days Between. It's based on the lyrics of a Grateful Dead song, a 1970s rock group. Theirs and other music has done a lot to help me over the years. Now, the words of this song struck me as very apposite, so I started thinking about the lyrics. So in this story, are stories about days between the tests, days between scans, days between hospital consultations, days between the stays in hospital, days between the treatments, the days between the stalled recuperation, the days between the tiredness and the incapacity to do anything. There are days between the visits of the black dog. So I'm using some of the lyrics to explore these themes. Comes the shimmer of the moon on black infested trees. The mind can be a forest at night, with bare tree branches showing jagged and black against the starless sky, cold, dangerous and unwelcoming. Then something changes, and like a dimmer switch operating on a stage lamp, the scene changes entirely. Shadows shrink into corners. The threatening branches melt into the background. Hidden things begin to show, and the scene is warm and coloured and safe. Now that something can be my wife, smiling and squeezing my hand, giving me a kiss. It can be the dog wanting a pet, or the cat coming onto my lap for a cuddle. It can be the children asking after me, caring for me, putting up with the grumpiness and flashes of anger, understanding the pain and my doubt and my insecurity. I couldn't do without them. It can be my friends being supporting and kind, taking me out when I can, letting me share the joy of their dogs as well, letting me take a break at their weekend cottage, encouraging me in these writings. The singing man is at his song, the holy on their knees. That is my music, of course. I can put my headphones on and drift into another world. The singing man, he could be one of many. The holy on their knees of the listeners gathered around. And there were days between when phantom ships with phantom sails set to sea on phantom tides comes the lightning of the sun on bright and focused eyes. The phantom ship, sails and tides turned out to be my writing. I'd not even thought of myself as a writer before this. The phantom ships are the initial idea, the phantom sails being the research, and the tides being the sometimes unknown paths the stories eventually take. And there were days, I know, when all we ever wanted was to learn and love and grow. Once we grew into our shoes, we know we told them where to go. Not me, my children. Rory growing up and out of his health issues, grabbing hold of life, learning to drive, setting up his own business, working hard at that business, working out himself how to manage his gender issues, how to take the right steps to his future as a man. Nathan working his own business, pursuing his interests, finding love. And Harry, a new flat to be refurbished, a wedding in Sorrento, a new job for husband Chris. They were all learning to love. They were all filling their shoes. We have our puppy, Padme, a young border collie. She wants to play, she wants to walk, she wants attention, she wants a tummy tickle. She demands and I give. She sometimes seems to understand how I feel. She gives too. She's learning how to love and grow. Watching all this going on around me in those days between gave me hope for the future. And there were days between, polished like a golden bowl, the finest ever seen. There were days like that. Going out for a day one November to Chartwell with Marie and the puppy. A polished blue sky, the sun blazing, the trees still with their autumn leaves glowing a burnished copper. The lake shone a deeper blue as I had ever seen on a lake, and I was sharing it all with my wife and the puppy. Other days, just as glorious, visiting other places with the family, friends and relations. Visiting Middleham in Yorkshire with Marie, staying at our friend's cottage. I had not been away for more than 6 months due to hospital treatment. The day we arrived, we walked up onto the hills and I looked at the view and I just cried. The weather may not have been so bright, but those days shone. Trips to Anglesey to see my mother, talking to her, experiencing the place where I grew up, visiting my favourite places. Then there was Italy and the wedding. The days shone, the weather shone, the family shone, the wedding shone, the finest I'd ever seen. Our balcony overlooked the Bay of Naples. The sea was a wonderful deep blue. The coastline, including Vesuvius, was like burnished gold. Hearts of summer held in trust, still, tender, young and green. The wedding, I have to say, was perfect. The holiday was perfect. The highlight of the trip, of course, was Harry and Chris. The young love, the hope, the new friendship in their lives, the love and friendship shown by all who attended. Young hearts blossoming tender with all their lives together in front of them. Valentines of flesh and blood, as soft as velveteen, hoping love would not forsake the days that lie between. Finally, I come to my wife of more than 30 years, my Valentine of even more years. She's had her own worries through all of this, her own illnesses that she's had to cope with. She's had her worries about me, about my being ill, about the treatment and whether and how long I'd actually live. She coped with the hospital visits, the good news and the bad news, the consultants, the messy bits, the black dog days. She kept being positive, caring and loving, and she coped. She was brave. It seemed that love did not forsake the days between. In fact, I was surrounded by love. The days between are what keeps me going. Now, there are days between for all of us. We just need to recognize them and appreciate them. My last story is about self-affirmation, about the fact that in spite of it all, you are still you. And it's called I Am. Again, based on lyrics from another Grateful Dead song. What shall we say? Shall we call it by a name? As well to count the angels dancing on a pin. Water bright as the sky from which it came, and the name on the earth that takes it in. We will not speak, but stand inside the rain and listen to the thunder shout, I am, I am, I am. Always been one of my favourite songs. Very evocative. And my youngest is transgender. Rory, I've mentioned him before. And as one does, we co-wrote a short play about him being transgender, about a father and a transgender child relearn how to communicate with each other. We took it to the Brighton Fringe Festival with some success. And I used this part of the song to emphasize the fact that he is his own character, personality, and being, whatever his sex. It was a good idea at the time. I think it helped both him and myself. It was before cancer, BC. BC and AC, after cancer, are completely separate parts of my life. I had no idea how much this song meant to me 2 years later. Cancer, when it's diagnosed, hits you like an express train. Then after the first impact, it buries you in fallout. It hems you in, it roofs you over, it insulates you, it puts you in a cage. The bars consist of hospitals, tests, doctors, emotions. You're living with the facts of cancer. You're living with the assumption you already built up of cancer, the belief you'll not survive, and the fact you will have a painful death. The concept of time with you lasts as far as the next test, the next diagnosis, the next prognosis, the next hospital stay. You are waiting to die. You are someone to be irradiated and pumped full of male and female hormones. You're someone to have a sci-fi spider-like machine poking holes and cutting bits out of you. You're someone without a future. People don't seem to talk to you in the same way. You have cancer. How does one talk with someone with cancer? One of the walking dead. The family are loving, but you can't help wondering when they're away from you, how are they actually reacting? How are they talking about you? You're filled with uncertainties about their feelings. You're filled with guilt for putting them through all of this. You feel excluded. You feel marginalized. You don't have a say in things. You're moved around as necessary. You're too tired to do the stuff you want to do. You're removed from your normal life. You struggle to be you, to make your mark. You don't have a future, so why bother? You're in limbo. You inhabit a different world from everyone else. And then the treatment ends. The doctors say you're clear of cancer. No more hospitals. This is different. This is unexpected. You feel like you're a World War I soldier peering out over a trench parapet and realizing no one is shooting at you anymore. You climb out slowly, feeling stunned, and look around, still waiting for the gunshot wound and the bullet striking you. But it doesn't happen. You take a deep breath and find you're looking out into a completely different world. You begin to find your feet and hesitantly try stepping into that future. You look around your brave new world and up into a clear blue sky and find that you cannot help shouting, I am, I am, I am. And of course you are. You always were. But you can feel it again now. Well, I hope you enjoyed these stories. I hope they've made you think. It would be great if you could buy my book. It's available on Amazon as an ebook and a paperback. All the proceeds, as I said, go to Prostate Cancer UK. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.